All right. We're looking at the first chapter in Hutchinson, Searching for Jesus, and looking at the section where he talks about miracles. Why would a person not believe that Jesus performed miracles? It's because of a presupposition going into the study that says miracles can't happen. But what if you go in with an open mind and saying, we're going to look at the evidence and see if it could have happened? You know, Pentecostals have an advantage here because many Pentecostals have experienced miracles, not only just hearsay or stories of people who thought they were sick and then were prayed for and now they're well, and it's all psychological, but actual documented miracles. Just this past week, I read in Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Miracles, a case that I am very familiar with because it happened to a young boy in the church I was pastoring. Craig Keener, in his 2-volume work on miracles, also mentions this. Young boy by the name of Brad Wilkinson, 8 years old. They discovered that he had 2 holes in his heart, and he was scheduled for surgery. We had the children of the church start praying for him every Sunday in children's church. They prayed, God, heal Brad. God, heal Brad. This was in November that they found that out. Surgery was scheduled for the next June. We had an evangelist. He had been a pastor, the son of one of our general superintendents in the USA, in the Assemblies of God, by the name of Wes Steelberg, who had been just given hours to live, and God healed him completely. And then he began to take this on the evangelistic road, and he would go and share and pray for people. He came to our church on the Sunday before Brad and his family were to go to the Missouri University for his surgery. He asked Brad, Bradley, do you believe that Jesus can heal you? And he said, yes. He laid his hands upon him. He prayed for him. The next Sunday, they went to the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri, for the surgery. They did a scan of the heart. The holes were there. They prepared for surgery. And when they did the final scan, the holes were gone. There were no holes in his heart. Now, the doctor went out and called my friend Ed and his wife Kay, and they went to with him to his office. He put up a X-ray saying, this is the way it looked earlier. This one is the way it looked just before surgery. The holes are gone. And he said, you can believe that this is a miracle. And this is recorded in both of these books. And there are many other things like that. Why do we not believe in miracles? Let's be open to it. And I know that all of us are, but many scholars are not. They are skeptics. They don't believe that God is at work in our world. And so we need to take that into consideration when we look at what they say. Now, he looks here at discrepancies in the gospel accounts of events. And he lists chronological divergences, variations in name and number, paraphrases and composite speeches, apparent doublets, omissions, and true contradictions. Many of the things that we call contradictions are not true contradictions. For example, one of the Gospels says Jesus went across the lake and was met by a demoniac. Jesus cast the demon out of it. It went into the pigs. They went down the hill and were drowned in the sea. Another gospel says Jesus went across the sea and 2 demoniacs came to him. Jesus prayed for them. The demons went out into the pigs went down into the sea and were drowned. Is that a contradiction? One says there was 1 demoniac, one says there were 2. No, it's not a contradiction. If you were an eyewitness, how would you report it? Well, you may report that there were 2, or you may just tell about 1, but it isn't a real contradiction. If you had everything exactly the same in all of those accounts, then you would be suspicious that they had gotten together, that they had colluded, and that they had made their stories the same. Just like in a law of court. If the witnesses say everything exactly the same, word for word, then you know that they've gotten together and they're probably not telling the truth. It is when you find things that are not the same that you can believe that what they're saying is true. And so we have witness accounts here in the Gospels, and they have the ring of authenticity. Okay, do you have questions or comments here? Okay. Taking a closer look at the New Testament, possible solutions to the synoptic problem. We already looked at that, so we're not going to go over that again. How Matthew and Luke edited Mark. There we would be dealing with redaction criticism, and we won't be going into that here. We can if you feel that it's necessary, but probably at this point it's not. Could the Gospels be earlier than we thought? When are they dated? And it used to be thought that they were late, but maybe they were late. And take, for example, the Gospel of Luke. The writer of Luke also wrote Acts. Acts ends with Paul in prison in the mid-60s. We can assume that that is when Acts was completed. Luke was written before that, we would assume, because it talks about things that happened before that. Luke used Mark, which means that Mark had to be written before that. So that pushes us back very close to the time of Christ. Scholarship used to say that they could have been written in the late 1st century or sometime in the 2nd century, but we don't believe that anymore, especially since we have a manuscript of John, just a little part, that was written about 125. 125. The gospel was probably written in the 90s. Yeah. So within 35 years, we have an actual manuscript that was written of John, and John was the last gospel to be written. So yeah. We don't say that they were late. It was much earlier than scholarship had often said. He deals with the question of eyewitnesses, and it seems that there is a good possibility that what we have in the Gospels are actual eyewitness accounts. Now we know that Mark and Luke were not there when the events of the Gospels happened. However, tradition has it through one of the church fathers by the name of Papias that Mark was written, the content of Mark comes from the sermons of Peter when he preached in Rome. Mark was there and he would write down what Peter wrote, and it wasn't like it was a chronological account of the life of Christ, but it was a lot of stories, a lot of sayings of Christ. Mark wrote those down, and so it is eyewitness. It's just that it's not from the pen of Peter, it's from the pen of Mark, because that's where Mark got his content. Luke did research, and you can look at the first 4 verses of the Gospel of Luke, and you can see how Luke did his research, and he did it well. If the Gospels were false and they were written early, there are people, eyewitnesses, who could contradict what is written there, but they haven't. Nobody has contradicted the things in the Gospels. So are the Gospels reliable? Yes, yes. Today, the pendulum has swung from the great skepticism that dominated New Testament studies back 100 years ago, and especially over the last 40 years. They have seen that the Gospels actually are much more reliable than was previously thought. Questions or comments here? Okay. Chapter 2, Liar, Lunatic, or Legend, Portraits of Jesus Today and Why They Are Less Plausible Than the Gospels. Here he goes through the quests for the historical Jesus. The first quest, the second quest, the third quest, and we already covered that when we looked at the history of Jesus research. And so I don't think that we would need to go through that again. He gives 8 models of who Jesus was, and 8 models of people that in the past and in the present see Jesus as. One is a deluded apocalyptic prophet. And of course, the first person to popularize that was Albert Schweitzer. But there are others who follow in his footsteps. Model 2, a violent revolutionary. The first person there was Herman Reimarus, and others today are following in his footsteps. Model 3, social reformer and community organizer. Model 4, wisdom sage. And this is largely the Jesus Seminar and those associated with it. Charismatic faith healer, Geza Vermes and Marcus Borg. Model 6, Jewish Messiah, N.T. Wright and Luke Timothy Johnson. Model 7, atoning sacrifice. And Model 8, founder of a global movement. Probably we would accept models 6, 7, and 8, incorporate all of those. Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. He was an atoning sacrifice, and he was the founder of a global movement. So we will be eclectic here, and we will choose 3 of them. Chapter 3, are the Gospels forgeries? Scholars discover manuscripts of the New Testament dating back to the dawn of the Jesus movement. Now, I assume that all of you have had New Testament introduction. And in New Testament introduction, we would cover textual criticism. This is where we got the New Testament. This is the process by which the manuscripts, starting back at the original manuscript from the pen of Paul or whoever, were copied, and those copies were copied, and those copies were copied. And textual criticism is the science of getting as far as possible back to the original manuscript. And he covers that here. I go into quite a bit of detail in that in New Testament introduction. let me ask you, how many of you have had New Testament introduction? Can I see your hand? How many of you have studied New Testament introduction?
Sir, I'm taking this trimester.
This trimester. That
Yes, sir.
is from Stuart Rochester?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The rest of you should have had New Testament introduction. How did you get this far in your studies without that? Kieran, do you know if you will cover textual criticism in New Testament introduction?
Sir, we haven't reached there until now. Like we just started the book of the Gospels, so we are discussing
Okay,
about. So hopefully later, sir.
okay, okay. Um, if not, it would be really good for you to learn this chapter well. And to me, it is a fascinating thing. And it is something that is so misunderstood today. You know, on Facebook, I see people saying, you know, these modern versions have taken verses out of the Bible, you know, compared to King James. And they've taken, you know, so many hundred verses out of the Bible. They're not there in the new versions. Well, hey, there's a reason for that. Why do you think that those verses are not in virtually all of the modern translations? Do you think they all got together? They had a conspiracy and they decided, well, we don't want this verse in there because they didn't like what it says? Well, of course not. Um, and I have tried to gently point people in the right direction when they come up with that kind of what I would call garbage, um, because simply they have never heard of textual criticism. They know nothing of what it's about. And for them, the King James is the Bible. You know, that came right from the Apostle Paul and the others. And just there is a lot of ignorance out there. And I'm pretty amazed. But we can deal with that more if you want. But I really hadn't planned to do that here because it should be done in New Testament introduction. Any questions here that you would like to ask?
Sir, I just want to say
Yeah.
something. I think in our last year lectureship, when Dr. Ben Witherington came, I think he also says like something similar to this. Like the more we are near to the coming times, like the more we are going towards the original Bible, like we are going like little bit like more authentic translations of Bible or verses, just like you said right now.
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. It's important, and to me, it's a fascinating study. Um, and we don't have to worry. You know, our faith is not in jeopardy by any textual issue. In none of those verses that are not there in the modern versions, there is no doctrine that is affected. So we're not going to throw out the Trinity or salvation or Christology because a verse is not there. 99% of all of the changes that we see coming down are inconsequential. Many of them are spelling differences. They don't even affect the translation at all. And so, yeah, okay. Um, the bottom line on this is that we can trust the New Testament. We can trust the text. Um, and the greatest scholars in New Testament studies affirm the fact that there is very little question about what the original autographs said. Um, And even if there is a question, we know what the possibilities are, because there are different variants. And it was one of those variants. Most likely it is one of those variants, but which one? And that would be the question. All right. All right, let us go to Kieran, and she is going to introduce us here to chapter 4, Have Archaeologists Found Jesus' House? So Kieran, we will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. Good morning, everyone. Okay, and thank you so much, Dr. Galen, for covering from chapter 1 to 3, because I also prepared small introduction from the previous one, but now I will just go straight to chapter 4. So chapter 4 is about some of the discoveries discovered by the archaeologists uh, regarding the authenticity of the historicity. And also like the chapter begins with the verse like Nazareth, can any good thing come from there? Nathanael asks. Come and see, said Philip. So I think this verse has been fulfilled. Like when I read this chapter, I felt like the verse has been fulfilled. So there are so many good things that came out of Nazareth. So we will be discovering what does the chapter says through my presentation.
Okay.
So one of the major highlights of this chapter is if you cannot understand my English, please forgive me, because I might use some of the word that might get you confused, but I hope the Spirit of God will help you to understand what I'm trying to say. Amen. So one of the major highlights of this chapter is the existence of the village Nazareth at the time of Jesus. According to the author, what many of us don't know is that until recently, there was very little archaeological or textual evidence for Nazareth in the time of Jesus. The village is not mentioned in any Jewish or Roman sources other than Gospels until about the 4th century, not one. It's not mentioned in the Hebrew Bible or in the collection of Jewish commentary known as Mishnah, which includes traditions dating back to the 1st century, nor in the voluminous work of the 1st century Jewish historian Josephus. So this makes people somehow like a little bit odd, because Josephus was the 1st century historian and who was also involved in commanding Jewish forces in Galilee in the early years of the Jewish war against Rome, which began in AD 66. He mentions the dozens, like he mentions like many small like hamlets in the area, including nearby Zappa, Cana, and Beit Sharim, but not Nazareth. And also, actually, in when we read this chapter, when we read this section, like some people they describe, they mention the name like Nazareth or Nazareth, but some did not. So the another earliest non-scriptural reference to Nazareth is found in the writing of the Christian traveler Sextus Julius of Africanus, quoted by the historian Eusebius, who described the town Nazareth. So I think this probably would have been taken place like the Christian traveler who visited maybe like nearly 100 between 180 and 250 I think, and then the historian he quoted around like 263 to 339. So who he described the town of Nazareth. So there is another quote like from the anonymous pilgrim of Bordeaux who visited Palestine in AD 333 to 334, and he kept a brief journal of his travels, but he never mentioned Nazareth in his list of the places he had visited. So now again, the first non-Christian reference to Nazareth was discovered in 1962 on a gray marble fragment in an ancient synagogue in Caesarea Maritima on Israel's coast. It was dated by Israeli archaeologists to around 8300. The writing on the fragment mentions various towns and villages in Galilee, including Nazareth, which allows scholars to know for the first time how Nazareth was spelled in Hebrew with the Hebrew letter. Now again, we have one team, Father Bagati's team found Iron Age and Roman era artifacts, including some wine press and olive press, interconnecting passages, water cistern and grain silos. Some depressions in the underlying rock led the archaeologists to conclude that stone houses had been there probably in the Roman period, and that the area around Basilica was in fact a Roman period village. So there is another evidence like the excavations of Mary's Well in the late 1990s, which uncovered a handful ancient coins, including 10 from the Maccabees area around 165 between 165 and 66 BC, two from the time of Herod the Great from 37 between 37 and 4 BC, and one from the time of Archelaus from 4 BC between 4 BC and 86. So digging in the grounds of Nazareth Village project, however, reveal little except for the poetry starts. All in all, not much to show. So that's why, like there were some common arguments among the people who claims that Jesus of Nazareth never existed because Nazareth never existed. But there was certain thing that happens, certain strange thing happen in the world of biblical archaeology. So one of the things was like they found like for example, like there is one example that author quote in the book which I really like. It says like, for years minimalists asserted that there was no evidence that a King David actually existed, and thus insisted that he was a fictional character as a real king, Arthur or Odysseus. But then in 1993, archaeologists working in the Tel Dan Nature Reserve in northern Israel uncovered a basalt stele now on display in Israel Museum in Jerusalem that mentions the house of David by its name.
Hey,
So the
Karen,
same time,
Karen,
yes, sir.
could I just piggyback on what you said? I think what Karen said is really important, that there are those who deny that certain characters existed because we have no evidence. We have no archaeological evidence. That's a very dangerous thing to do. We call that an argument from silence. What archaeology can do is confirm, but it can't deny. It can confirm when, for example, this stele that had David's name on it, it can confirm David, but just because it hadn't been discovered, we can't say David didn't exist. So the argument from silence is very dangerous. And I just wanted to add that, Karen. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. And also, sir, it proves the idea like in the textbook, we found like there was like some of the conceptions about among the people, like they think some of this, like the village of Nazareth is all something like fictional character which never exists or something like that. So we can see like the same type of thing is now happening with the New Testament, as archaeological digs confirm the historicity of many people, places, and events in the gospel, including the village of Nazareth itself. So so as we continue to read the sections, a mythicist writer named Rene Sam published in his book The Myth of Nazareth, the Invented Town of Jesus. He mentions like Israeli archaeologists made a stunning announcement that they had discovered the remains of a stone house in Nazareth, just steps from the Basilia of the Annunciation, dating back to the time of Jesus.
Okay,
So as we,
Karen,
yes, sir.
you have 10 minutes now. I just wanted to give you the time here, and you know there are several more archaeological discoveries to go. So I just want to make you aware of that. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I will finish within 10 minutes. So
Okay.
I will try to hopefully. So as we continue to read, like the team found the remains of supporting walls, what looked like an underground hideout or a safe room, a courtyard and elaborate series of systems that appear designed to collect water from the roof of a building. So these are like when they also they also found the ruins of a domestic house with a few small rooms and an open courtyard dating to the late Hellenistic to early Roman period, first century BC to early second century AD. So as we continue to read, like in other words, they found like the cluster of ecclesiastical buildings in downtown of Nazareth, the Basilia Saint Gabriel, the Basilica Saint Gabriel Church, Marysville, almost certainly were built directly over the village of Nazareth that lay back into Jesus' days. So Alexandre concludes that Nazareth was indeed settled throughout the New Testament era, located in an isolated basin in the hills far from any main road, and thus would not have been noticed by Josephus or Roman officials. And other archaeologists believe that Nazareth isolation spared it from the ravages of the Jews' war of AD 65 to 70 and perhaps of earlier Roman persecution. So there are some other archaeologists like who goes even further. According to Ken Dark, he is the director of Nazareth Archaeological Project and a professor at University of Reading in United Kingdom. Uh, Here, like he found the another site of in Nazareth, which was a first century house partly made of mortar and stone walls cut into rocky hillside, could very well have been Jesus' actual childhood home. Dark also argues that this site first uncovered in the 1880s by nuns at the Sisters of Nazareth convent, but only excavated in 2006, was revered in the Byzantine era as Jesus' home. So Dark also believes that the house was abandoned sometime during the first century and then it was used as a burial ground. So as we continue to read further, like there are the other discoveries, archaeological discoveries that is related to the New Testament, and these are like recent Nazareth excavations, first century synagogue in Magdala, the Cephas Osore, the crucified Yochanan, the Jesus both Saint Peter House, Sepphoris, and Roman inscriptions, and also the some of the lavish places of the Jerusalem aristocracy during the time of first century. So when we read all these archaeological explanation, like the findings, the discovery of these archaeological places, we can see like this has been supported by the gospels. Actually, some of the things has been supported by synoptic gospels, and the things that we cannot find in the synoptic gospel is supported by the gospel of John. I just want to take few examples, like for example, like the Cephas Osure, like which was mentioned in John 11:15, as well as like when we go about when we read about the like Roman inscription, like there are few names that has been mentioned, like regarding like Pontius Pilate, and also like the book of Acts also mentions like the book of Acts chapter 13, it also mentions like it also mentions Galileo, the proconsul of Achaia, mentioned in Acts 18, and Erastus, the city treasures in Corinth, mentioned both in Acts chapter 19:22 and 2nd Timothy 4:20. We also find like in other chapters also it has been mentioned. So so what I would like to conclude here is like I know like it's this chapter is very important for me because sometimes we need facts and evidence in order to believe like what we are holding our faith on to. So as a believer, as for me also as a Christian, it's very important like to find out like whatever has been mentioned in the Bible was actually happened or actually existed in the world. So but that doesn't means like I will go away from my faith, but it will make my faith stronger in the Lord, like whatever mention is in the Bible is truth. And also I love the fact like to see like how through the past, like many people have their different views, like they questions the existence of the certain things. But as the time goes by, as the researchers kept on continuing their research, God has bring all this evidence that can prove like the Nazareth was there, the village of Nazareth, the existence of Nazareth was there. And all this, the other archaeologists discovery also supports like whatever has mentioned in the Bible, it actually took place in the past. But at the end, sir, I just want, that's my question, like what after reading this chapter, I did not find, I know like the author has presented like various evidences that clarifies our understanding, but as a reader, like I was expecting like something from the author, like that he really wants to put emphasis on, like based on his archaeological findings. So that's a question that remains in my heart after reading this chapter. And also, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. But before you ask your questions, I just want to read one small phrase that is mentioned in the beginning of the book from N.T. Wright. Question always remains. So that's the thing. Thank you very much.
What was the quote from N.T. Wright?
So it's just a small phrase, like he says, like questions remain. So
Oh, okay, good. Thank you, Kieran. Do you have any questions? Now, I asked you all to come up with one question, and we're going to ask Kieran, and we're going to discuss it. So, you know, there's something really strange here on my computer. On the computer that I'm using here, the only ones that are not frozen are me and Kieran. But on my other computer, where I have all your faces, I see movement. So I don't know what's going on here. It's rather strange. So Daniel's going back and forth there, but over here he's not. So I don't know what's happening. Anyway, what are your questions that you came with today to ask Kieran?
I have a question.
Yes.
It seems that the author just dealt with evidence. I want to know whether he discovered the presupposition behind the theory or the question.
Okay. Why doesn't he, what now? Deal with presuppositions?
I want to know whether he deal with the presupposition behind the question.
Okay. In other words, when people are doing this archaeological kind of work, the presuppositions that they have, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I only heard that he discovered, he deal with the evidence all of about evidence.
Right.
But I want to know the presupposition. How did he deal with it?
Do you have any idea on that, Kieran?
So I think if we will deal with the presuppositions, I think he should write another book also. Because I think the one of the important thing that we need to remember is the author's main objective for writing this book. Like as he just wait, actually I just closed my notes, so I will just read for you, because we really need to understand like why the author wrote or write this book. Like his purpose for writing this book is actually for the two groups. The first one is for the Christians of many denominations who have a wide variety of beliefs of about how and to what degree the Bible is inspired or even inerrant, and secondly it's for the general secular people. So I think for me it's like what author wrote, like for me I'm fully satisfied, because how should I say, like because in order to maintain like this both group of people and to write a book like this must be very difficult task. And also like we need evidence, pastor. Like presuppositions can be
Yeah.
like anything, so we cannot deal with all the presuppositions that we have, like only the thing that has been supported by the Bible, or the answers which we can find in the Bible or by the historical evidences. So from that historical evidences perspective, I think he has already answered some of the presuppositions that might have occurred in any people's mind. uh, l- so that would be my answer for you. If I haven't
Okay.
fully justified your questions, please forgive me.
Okay.
Thank
You
you.
know, ideally, presuppositions are going to be laid aside as much as possible in dealing with evidence. Say you're in a court of law and you have jurors there who are going to decide guilt or innocence. They're going to look at evidence. Hopefully, they don't have their minds made up. Hopefully, their decision will be based on the evidence given in court. The same should be true in looking at biblical evidence. So whether we believe that Jesus was the Son of God, whether we believe that the Bible is truth, whatever, the evidence should convince us one way or the other. I mean, we should let the evidence speak. And I think that maybe part of his point is that the new discoveries that have been found disprove some of the theories that used to be prevalent, especially those that were very skeptical about the life of Christ, the truth of the Gospels, and those kind of things. Okay, well, what other questions do we have now?
Sir,
Go ahead.
like for me,
First, Peter first.
thank you, Marsha. I really love what Hutchinson is doing in this book, getting a lot of evidence, especially for the New Testament, all the archaeologists find. And but I think he even mentioned in the chapter that Karen was doing, and I think it's very important. And I don't know why, but he said that the archaeologists have excavated the Holy Land for more than 2 centuries, something like that. But they never find anything from the Old Testament. And I'm looking. I think it's really good to have some of those evidence from the Old Testament as well, to kind of like because there's so many ancient new A&E literature that are so similar to the Old Testament, and it would be nice to have some of those evidence, if there were any.
There is a lot of evidence in archaeology that has to do with the Old Testament. They're not mentioned in the book because here he's searching for Jesus, so it's a New Testament subject. So that is why we don't have those in this book. But I subscribe to a Biblical Archaeology Review, and it seems like every issue they have new things that have been found. Really some quite amazing evidence from people from the Old Testament that that give evidence for the truth of Scripture. Okay, it's time to take a break. We'll come back and then we will take the questions from Masha and Daniel, and then we will go on with the normal lectures. Okay, let's take 10 minutes.